Okay, so good afternoon. Thanks for joining. We'll get going in just a few minutes when people start logging on. To those that are new, usually like an alert goes out on Facebook when we're live, and so it takes about a minute or two for people to really come on. But we'll lead off while we wait with how we did the market today. I am checking now. Okay, so not a great day for Viacom, although the whole market was really down today. Not a great day overall in the market. Viacom's down. It's still trading in that same range. I need it to break through that, that 43 level. I think it will. I think there's been a lot of calls, which are bets, long-term bets on it, over that level for the next month and a half. I think it's a good sign. I did make some small trades today, pre-market, and then one I shorted a stock called Cleveland Cliffs later on in the day. Both went well. I'll post those on our financial page in a little bit. And I also purchased JetBlue. I don't know if it was a good purchase or not. I bought a very small amount of it. On hindsight, I don't know that I love the trade. I may not hold it. I don't know. Whatever. I purchased it because stocks often hit what's called a floor. So if it drops down to a certain price and bounces off that multiple times, usually that shows there's support at that level. So I want to buy off of that level. I did that today. I don't necessarily love the airline stocks right now. I like JetBlue, but I don't love them. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do with that in the next couple of days. If it stays around this number, I'll hold it. I think if it drops below the 1750 range, I will drop it. But that's where we are. But I will post the 2 day trades I made on the financial page and why I made those later on tonight. So we have, if you are following the markets, we know we have a really big day tomorrow. And tomorrow is the Fed is going to the Fed is basically the Federal Reserve will either make a decision or give guidance. So the way that the president can make a statement and people are wondering in his inflection and the way he says something, what does he mean for the future? He may not say yes or no about something, but you can get kind of a sense. We're trying to determine that tomorrow with Jay Powell, who's the head of the Fed. And he will give a speech and talk about the markets and what steps they want to take to help the economy. To those who are not familiar with how the Fed works, when the stimulus package was passed, a large part of that stimulus package were the checks that went out. A large part of that was unemployment that went out. Some of it was aid to what have you, right? All this aid stuff. But a significant amount of that stimulus package went to the Fed. And it went to the Fed to do something called quantitative easing. And what that is we've talked about this before, but a strong economy is based on the movement of money. So think about a giant circle and 10 people in that circle, and they're all standing around the outside of that circle, and they're all millionaires. That you would think that's a good economy, right? You have all these millionaires in this economy. But the truth of the matter is, how much money they have doesn't matter. Is the money moving is what matters. Are people buying things? Are they selling things? Are they borrowing? Are people paying interest? Are they taking on debt? People moving money is what a strong economy is. I think back in history, after crisis times, that was the big issue, right? Remember George Bush after 9/11, he said, people, come to New York. Don't stop going to plays. Don't stop visiting. We need people to spend money. After the stimulus package, after the crash in 2008, 2009 with Obama, part of that was to get people to spend money. And so when this happened, when the world shut down with Corona, the concern was that people wouldn't spend money anymore. So first, they had a stimulus package that made sure people can pay their bills, make sure they could pay their rent, unemployment, what have you. That was the first step. The second step was to make sure there was liquidity in the markets, that people felt confident to borrow, there was money available. And the Fed does that by buying certain long-term debt. So it could be bonds, it could be securities, what have you, but it makes sure there's money in the market. As long as there's money in the market, and the Fed says we're going to put money in the market, people have confidence in the market, in the stock market, they're out there buying, they're out there selling, they're taking on debt, putting money on the credit card, and that makes a strong economy. And it worked. After the initial crash, there was a record, a banner year in the stock market, and many people have more money now than they've ever had, more money saved than they've ever had. Didn't spend money on cruise ships, didn't spend money on vacation, didn't go to Broadway. A lot of people spend money on their homes, and some people save money. So the steps the Fed took by pouring money into the economy were significant. Part of that initial stimulus package was $700 billion of this process of buying these bonds or not securities, but bonds or some mortgage-backed securities, I guess you can say, to keep money in the market. And then when the second stimulus passed, part of that was we're going to keep spending, I believe it was about $100 billion a month on continuing this process. So people watching the stock market right now are saying, are we going to keep going? Inflation's going up. Does it make sense to keep pouring money into the market? The mentality of the Fed, Jay Powell, has been that we're not back to full employment yet, and that this inflation is just temporary. It would only last for a few months and drop back down. Do I agree with that? Not really, but that's the logic. So tomorrow, everybody who's following both politics and economics is watching what he says. We're guessing he's going to keep the policy up, but if he says he may end it sooner, it will have an impact on the market overall. Some sectors will do phenomenal. Some sectors won't do as well. If he were to continue it as is and keep pouring money into the market, you'll probably see the market do well tomorrow. And that's likely what will happen. So we're looking for any type of sign that he might pull back sooner rather than later. So that's just what's happening tomorrow. We talk about this a lot, that economics and finance and politics are incredibly interrelated. The decisions that are made, the appointments that are made are very, very much interrelated. No one can say they understand politics or follow politics without also following economics. And we see many times that people may not fully understand economics when they take stands politically. And one of the examples of that is we have seen articles in the last few days, or really last few months, on CEO compensation during 2020. And there are, depending on what study was done and how many CEOs they were counting, how many of the Fortune 500 companies are counting, CEOs in general did see a significant amount of increase, about 14%. Some studies say about 20%. What does that mean? By the way, I'm sorry, is my chat not working? Well, I guess not. So here's the problem. All of these articles are written in a way that gets you to say, oh, this is terrible. These guys are so overpaid. This is awful. And I get that. It's easy. When somebody was paid $114 million, it's easy to say this is crazy. This is wrong, especially during a crisis. And there are some tricks that CEOs do to make sure. Yeah, thanks, Richard. I appreciate that. Usually like 10 people come on and say, hi, we have an audience here. I've got like two different screens with one's 19 and one has 27 on it. So I don't know. We broadcast on a couple different Facebook pages, but usually people say good morning. No one say good morning or good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. So this issue of CEO compensation, and there are some tricks CEOs do to make sure they maximize their compensation. There's no question about that. During COVID, one of the first things they did was to lower expectations. So they came out and said, listen, we can't even set, usually every quarter they come out and they have a conference call, and that conference call sets forward expectations. Our sales next quarter are going to be this, or here's the numbers we're going to hit on subscriptions to something we have next quarter. And so the first thing they did was to say, we don't know. This is going to be crazy. It's going to be wrong. And so you lowered expectations. What happened is either the numbers were much better, or a year later they were, blew away those low expectations. And so the stock price soared. And most CEO compensation is based on that stock price soaring. Now, we've said this before. You can complain about CEOs and you can complain about Wall Street and those stock markets soaring, but that's your pension, that's your union retirement, that's your 401k, that's your police and your firemen and your town employees and your government employees and then your iron workers and all the unions and all your 401ks. That's helped by that happening. And the fact that those CEOs play the game well, know what they're doing, is not something to take lightly. A very good CEO is not that different from a very good basketball player or a very good baseball player. And if you're complaining about CEO compensation, and many are, and it does seem like a crazy number. There's no question about it. But here's some of the numbers. I want to pull this up of the world's top 10 highest paid athletes in 2021. Conor McGregor, UFC fighter and apparently a part-time boxer, $180 million. Barcelona's Lionel Messi, I guess a soccer player, $130 million. Ronaldo, $120 million. Dak Prescott, the quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys, this is spectacular, $107 million he made. So this is contracts, this is endorsements, all this stuff. LeBron James, $96 million. Now, this is an interesting question. So the same CEO will compare. If the Knicks were to get LeBron James, the value of their franchise would go up by 15, 20% immediately. And they're a multi-billion-dollar franchise. That's how much the right CEO is worth to these companies. Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan is the A-list of all CEOs. He's worth every penny. Nobody would get rid of him. If he were to resign or leave that job, people would throw any bank they want at him for him to be the CEO. Good CEOs are worth every penny. And so it was interesting when the stimulus took place after Obama, and the bailout was taking place. The banks were asked to take money, whether they needed it or not. They had to show confidence in the system. The banks were asked, JP Morgan and Citibank and all these banks were asked to take money. And part of the stipulation that almost was placed on them was a limit on CEO and officer compensation. And those companies fought back like crazy because as soon as you say we can't pay you that much, you have a limit to who will come there. They will go to a foreign country, or they go to a country or a company that did not take that money. So if the government wanted these companies to take the money, whether they needed it or not, they had to shore up the system. They had to show confidence in the system. They needed these companies to take it. JP Morgan didn't need money. They needed them to take it. They couldn't put a stipulation on executive compensation because they would lose those executives quickly to those other companies. This is the same as sports. The same way the Yankees and Red Sox bid on a player, because that player can be the difference between a middle road team and a World Series team. The Giants bid on players and pay them more because when they're very good, they're very good. Dak Prescott, does he deserve that kind of money? I don't think so, but he got it because he had the Cowboys in a position where they needed him. LeBron James is worth every penny. He goes to any average team. He went to the Cleveland Cavaliers, who were a terrible basketball team, and instantly made them into a finals team. A good CEO can rescue a company. The CEO of Uber basically rescued it. A good CEO can come in and drastically change everything. So this idea that compensation is high, yes, it sounds awful. Yes, how can somebody be worth $60 million, $42 million in a terrible crisis year? But managing that company through that crisis year, making sure all the investors are whole, making sure your 401k still went up, your pension still went up, is significant. It takes talent. And it's not that different from sports. Now, we don't condemn our athletes. We still watch LeBron James. So all these articles come out, and they're written in such a way that's, can you believe how much it is? And they're all written, the same sentence you'll see every one. Despite COVID, this CEO took a 24% increase. Yeah, he got a 24% increase every year. So when somebody started talking about that, and I started doing some research on it, yes, those articles came out. But if you did CEO compensation 2019, you see the same numbers. If you see 2018, you see the same numbers. Now, the question that comes up with CEOs is, the CEO compensation growing at a drastically higher rate than the average employee? Yes, it is. No question about it. Because there's much fewer of them. It's supply and demand. There might be 100 CEOs that are worth serious money. There's thousands or millions of employees that can do the job that those other employees can do. That's normal. This is the system that we have. This is what a capitalist system is. And we can pull back on that, but our capitalist system is something that is mirrored in some ways worldwide. So if we pull back in that and say, okay, listen, Anybody who's paid more than 20 million is going to pay a higher tax, or we can't pay our CEOs higher than a certain amount of money. Well, then China will hire them, or Europe will hire them, or that same company will move overseas to hire that talent. Because if you can't hire that talent, you have what's called a brain drain. You start losing talent. You don't have people, and you can't compete in the same level. Same thing happens in sports. CEOs of large corporations are not that much different. Okay, what was the final comment? I forgot what the topic was. Oh, yeah, let's talk about this. The Connecticut Mirror had a very interesting article, and I was reading it, and I'm going to just read the headline. Schools with Native American mascots would lose funding under the budget bill. And so, what happens, they're having a special session. A marijuana bill will pass. A budget implementer bill will be put in there as well. And what this bill ends up becoming, it's negotiated by everybody, but Democrats clearly have a significant advantage in negotiations. And this is where a bunch of crap gets thrown into a bill. Like literally crap, like anything they couldn't get passed or something they want to push, they're going to throw it into this bill. They're going to call it the budget implementer. There's little things in here that have nothing to do with the budget. But part of this is and I'm going to read this directly from them. Budget language written by Senator Kathy Ostin from Sprague. Where the hell is Sprague? Whose district is home to the Mashantucket, Pequot, and Mohegan tribal nations, would make Killingly pay for the decision by costing the town its share of state aid generated by tribal casinos. So right now, towns get money from the casinos. Part of the deal was casinos pay tax revenue on their slot machines, some other things, and that's distributed to towns. Killingly, they made news by making their mascot Redmen. They had changed it at one point to something else, and then people got mad. They changed it back to Redmen. And Senator Ostin wants to make sure that the money coming from the tribes to her, to Killingly, are rejected, or they can't get money because they are of the name of their mascot. And so I sat here for about a half hour, and I'm sitting there, and I'm thinking to myself, how do you feel about this? Do I get that a name can be offensive? Yes. Do I agree with tying tax revenue to the sports team's name at a high school? And then I come up with this question. One of the complaints we get about Democrats all the time, and there's truth to this. Why is it only moral high ground when you've decided it's moral high ground? Like suddenly you're woke. Like you didn't propose this in the past. This has been in place for forever. The Mohegan Sun tribes the casino's been there for God knows how long. Yet suddenly you're woke, and therefore the moral high ground is yours on your timetable. It's suddenly wrong now to this point because you've decided it's wrong to this point. How does that make sense? And how do you tie in high community? You have your own rights. We want to protect town's rights. You have made this decision, and therefore we're going to make you pay a financial price for it. Does that make sense to me? And it's a battle I have. Do I agree with the name? I don't really care about the name. Do people who are of Indian descent care about the name? I have read things that they do. Would I just assume change it? Yeah, it's a sports team. Who gives a shit? I mean, come on. Really, at the end of the day, if it's offensive to somebody, do we care? But then you're reaching a point that you're going to say, wait a minute, your town, the residents of your town, some of the needs, this money may go towards social services. It may go towards roads. It may go towards education. Your moral high ground, which you didn't have yesterday, which 20, 30, 40 years that the casino's been there, they've been giving money. Nobody had that yesterday. Suddenly you've decided it's your turn to be morally high ground here and then the self-righteous bullshit. And now that town can't get that money for their roads or social services or education. Why is your timetable the only timetable? If you want to make a point, instead of an implementer bill, bring it up the next session, have an actual debate, in committee. Let Republicans and Democrats and people from around the state have part of this discussion, have public hearings, and then make that determination. And if it goes through a legal, proper process, fine. You don't have to like the outcome, but elections have consequences. But suddenly you have some crisis of conscience, and we'll have to base our morality on your timetable. This representative, what the hell is her name again? I don't know what her name was. Kathy Ostin from Sprague. From Sprague. Where the hell is Sprague? And that's where it's lost on me here. I get the self-righteous stance, and I get you represent the Mashantucket Pequot Indians. Then let them make the request and go through a normal political process of a public hearing, let everybody have their say, and then make it known to everybody in the state if this is going to be the case. I may not agree with it then, but at least you went through the process at the end of the day. If someone's offended by something, okay, I have no problem changing it. Couldn't care less if somebody changes the name of a mascot of a team. The only people who really care are the diehard townies. I keep going back to the Married with Children, what's his name? Ed Bundy, whose greatest moment in his life was what happened in the high school football game. Like those people, we were always called and I went to Derby. I don't know if it's still called the Red Raiders. Our team was the Red Raiders. I don't know if that's good or bad. I have no idea if that's offensive or not. And I wouldn't be the person it's offensive to. And if they changed it to the Derby Knicks, so be it. Who gives a damn? Are we really going to lose sleep over a school mascot name? At the end of the day, the Washington Redskins are now the Washington football team. Does anybody care? Do they have less fans now? Did their ratings go down? Did Dan Snyder, the owner of the team, lose money? No. So at the end of the day, is it really a big deal? No. But when you start saying it's a big enough deal that you get to say another town doesn't get tax revenue, that's a problem. And you get to say another town doesn't get tax revenue despite not having a public hearing on this new policy, despite not having a push to get public hearing from the Republicans and Democrats and town leaders and the Mashantucket Pequots or Indians of all over the place to give their testimony. And you want to push it through in a bill presented last night at midnight or something, and will go through as a budget implementer bill. That's absurd. It's nonsense. So the comments here, do people name their teams to be negative? No, it's meant as a positive. For example, strength, courage, and fighting warrior spirit. It is unconstitutional, just flat out wrong to exclude money from towns. I do think it's flat out wrong. So listen, I don't think for a second these teams were initially named that way in a negative way. That said, if someone's offended by it, what does it hurt to change the name? At the end of the day, is it really, we have to ask ourselves a serious question. Is this worth giving a shit about? The name of the team is what? I gotta look this up again. The name of the team is the Red Men. Is that considered negative by the Indian community? I don't know. I know the Indian community probably didn't have a huge input and say when that name was initially done, 50 years ago. And now that it's becoming a thing, if they want to say, listen, that's offensive, okay. I'm Italian, and always the Italian connection has been organized crime in some way. Was it Goomba? Like, we're going to call it the brand for Goombas or some shit like that. Like, I don't know. Would I be? I don't really give a shit. I'm not offended by much. But if somebody's offended by it, I just assume have a title that's not all that offensive. South Park named their team the Cows. And then PETA had a problem with it. I mean, in some cases, it's just crazy, right? But who cares? It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, if something's offensive, if I'm doing something that is horrifically offensive to you and it's in my power to change it, and it doesn't, cost me money, there's no financial repercussions, there's no social repercussions, if you just change it, then you change it. It's really not that big a deal. That's not the point, though. The point is should one elected official be able to sneak something into this without public hearings, without hearing from all the people involved, and say that town doesn't get money because I think what they do is offensive to somebody else? That's the question. And I have an opinion on that. No, I don't believe that should happen. Amy, Derby High School. Yeah, what is the Derby High School? I'm not going to click. I can't click on that now. What is it? Is it still the Red Raiders? Did they change it? I grew up in Derby, but I went to school at Emmett, so I went to a trade school. So what was it? Emmett was, I think, the Condors. I think. We didn't even have a football team. But thank you for posting that. Senator of Sprague. She was the first select person. She was both. Let the select person job going after her own town. Yeah, I don't know. Well, her own town. She wasn't talking about Sprague. She was talking about a Killingly or something like that. What was the name of the town here? Killingly is a town that's in question. But I question any role of an elected official at a state level saying the town didn't do what I want them to do, and therefore they should lose money. How does that make sense? So Derby's on the list. Great. So your town, because you chose a name that somebody might be offended by, may not get money for social services, may not get money for education, may not get money for roads because of a decision made on a town level. I think that's ridiculous, first of all. But second of all, if that's going to be state policy, bring it up at the beginning of a full session, have full public hearings on it, hear from the towns, hear from the Indians, hear from Republicans, hear from Democrats, get everything lined up first. You don't slide it in an implementer bill. That's what's crazy. It'll pass. I mean, I don't know if that part is probably vote coming very quickly. It's just crazy. It's just absurd. Amy, according to a list obtained by the current 12 Connecticut schools may have names or logos that qualify under the new provision. Canton, Conard, I don't even know where Conard or Kennard, Derby, Killingly, Montville, North Haven, Wamogo Regional, really? Wamogo Regional, Wilcox Tech, Wilton, Windsor, and Torrington. So she is now saying that those 12 towns should not get money. In a provision she's including in an implementer bill, which was presented last night. Absurd. Absolutely absurd. Should absolutely be removed. No question about it. And this is a question of, even when we pass the affordable housing law, even Democrats that were for it, we're not impacting towns' decisions to rule themselves. We're not taking over local zoning. We're not taking over. Well, here we have a senator taking over local decision making. They all quickly defended themselves. We're not taking over local zoning. It did. It was a nonsense provision, especially about accessory houses, which was absurd. And it did absolutely circumvent local zoning. But they all defended it. Not us. No, we didn't do that. And now you have a senator doing exactly that and not apologizing for it. That's crazy. At the very least, if you're going to do that and put a policy in like this, have a public hearing like you should for any law. Let people talk about it. Hear from all sides. This proposal is nonsense. Okay, that'll do it for today. We will be back tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Thank you for coming. And by the way, thanks for commenting. I went like the first 10 minutes with no comments. I'm like, does anybody actually want? I have, on both screens, I only get about 45, 50 people watching. But we're going to take you on a tour of Wamogo, Washington, Morris, and I think you meant Goshen. Yeah, I don't know. I think in school, there was like an Indian museum we went to in that area. I don't remember for sure, but back in, I'm 43, so we're talking, I don't know, 7 years ago or something. Whatever. Anyway, I'll be back tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Thanks for joining me. I hope you all have a phenomenal night. Enjoy the weather. I have to get a workout in and some tennis, and I will see you tomorrow at 4. Guys, have a great night.